We have new information about the mental health of a Navy veteran accused of abducting Ashanti Billie from a local military base. We've learned Eric Brown is currently being treated at a federal medical facility in North Carolina. 13 News Now investigative reporter Laura Geller joins us with recent court filings which reveal new details.
Well, the new filings talk about if and how there can be a prison hearing to involuntarily medicate Eric Brown. A court hearing on that issue is set for Thursday. These records give us new insight into Brown's mental state and his situation at the Federal Medical Center.
Last we told you, federal authorities found out whether or not a forensic psychologist believes the Navy veteran accused of abducting and murdering Ashanti Billie is mentally competent to stand trial. But that report was not made public. This motion, filed by Eric Brown's defense attorneys, quotes a sealed order on that topic. It says FMC Butner has been tasked with restoring Mr. Brown to competency, or at least placing him in treatment for his schizophrenia. The motion shows Brown is in a lockdown unit. He is kept in the same cell 24 hours per day. Lawyers write they've been told Brown never uses the 1 hour of recreational time he is allowed. The filing also includes this email chain between attorneys and the facility's chief psychiatrist. On May 16th, the doctor wrote Brown remains in a psychotic state. In this exhibit, one of the lawyers states he was told at the end of last month Brown is a danger to himself or others. The defense attorney recalls the conversation with a nurse at Butner, in which she said Brown had been put in chains to be brought out of his cell. When he was returned to it, Brown allegedly swung the chain restraint at the guard. According to the declaration, the nurse said later Brown did not look at her or do anything to indicate he understood what she was saying.
And at this point on the federal level, Brown is only facing one abduction charge. Charlotte police charged him with murder, but that case has not moved forward just yet. Laura Geller, 13 News Now.